Hi, Jack.
Hello.
Hey there. All right, this is going to be a lot of fun. So we have a special guest today, um, uh, Jack Revy, who is a nature journaler. We met when we were just trying to figure it out when you were some years ago. Was it during the pandemic or it was during the pandemic? You were 10 or 11 years old?
Yeah, actually, I don't even know when it was. I feel like I watched one of your videos and then it was like a little while and then I really got into it. It was probably like around like 3 or so years ago though.
Great. Well, since that time, you've been doing lots of journaling, really interesting, rich journal pages, and um, and have developed your skills as a as an observer and 2D artist. But then you've taken your love of birds to in a different direction. Uh, and as you can see from the little friend in the corner of Jack's screen, Jack started carving birds and and has is now an award-winning bird carver. And we're really delighted to have you on the show to talk to us a little bit about your process. Um, the Something that you have to do if you are working in 3 dimensions is to think in 3 dimensions. And sometimes when people are drawing stuff on a flat piece of paper, we just um, we make all of our work if we think about that bird as flat, we draw it flat. But the more that you can start to get your brain to wrap all around a bird, you're then able to draw it from any angle. And as you do that, it has a sense of volume and form to it. I saw the work that you were doing, Jack, and I commissioned Jack to make a couple of sculptures for me that I wanted to use in my classes. So shortly, we're going to start to have a series of classes on visualizing birds from all sorts of different angles. And to do that, say hello to my little friends, these two little birds with slight differences in their postures, um, all very, very intentional. These birds are going to be helping us be able um, to understand how to foreshorten birds. I absolutely loves these. I was expecting good. This is so much better than I was hoping for, and we're gonna have it. You're gonna learn a ton um, when we use Jack's birds to help us with our lessons. Yeah, people are noticing all those feather groups. Just sort of the anatomy um, on these carvings is just so solid. For those who've been studying bird anatomy, you're looking at that going like, oh my gosh, it's a bird feather tract map. It's great. So I asked Jack if he'd be willing to kind of walk us through his process of how do you how do you think about birds in 3 dimensions? What is the process of wood carving like? What do the tools look like? What does this process look like? And kind of take us through this a little bit. If people want to kind of start to create their own little 3D models, either from wood or even getting some Sculpey or some clay, I really want to encourage people to start to do that. But a wonderful way to kind of jump into that is just to kind of go on a bird carving adventure with you and look deeply into your process. Jack Revy, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Right. I'm going to turn my camera over to, oops, I need to not do that. That's not, I'm starting in the middle, aren't I? Hold on a second. I need to bring. There we go.
There we go.
All
All
right.
right, so I
So
guess
whenever you say next slide, I will advance it to the next slide.
cool. All right. So I guess I'll start with a little background of how I got into carving. And then I'll go through some of the tools that I use so that if I say carbide or burner or airbrush, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I first got into it. Actually, I was laid up from the first of three knee surgeries, um, about 2 years ago in June, and my grandmother got me a little whittling kit, just like a little knife with some wood and a little like instruction booklet on how to like do these little wizards. And I was like, wow, that's I've never even thought of that. That's really cool. I would love to try that. Um, so I followed the instructions and I did one of these little wizards. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of fun. So I kept doing it. Got a little better at hand carving, got another knife. And I was having a lot of fun with it. And then I started to have like some questions, like how do you do this? Like when you make this cut, then what do you do? How do you do this for the eye? And nobody else in my family was a wood carver, so um, me and my mom looked around to see if there were any classes nearby, and eventually I happened upon just half an hour away from our house this guy, Jeff Moore. We were like, wow, he's a world class carver. That'd be a lot of fun to go take lessons from him. So I walked in, um, expecting like knives and gouges and all this hand carving stuff, but little did we know he power carves. So um, that's that's um, that's what I've been doing ever since. I did it, little chickadee. It's actually right here. This is my first carving, well, power carving. That is this little chickadee.
That has such the proportions and feeling of the bird. I'm uh, delightful, absolutely delightful.
But I mean, there were a lot of things wrong with it, and then I mean, I kept practicing, and I got some of the tools so I could do it at home. I was actually given a lot of them by one of the guys there. That was really generous of him. And ever since, I've been going to his classes. I've been competing at the Ward Championship, which is actually like the biggest carving championship in the world, actually. And it's only like 3.5 hours away in Ocean City, from our house. So I've been doing that. I did that this year and the year before. And it's crazy to see like the world class stuff, like the world and masters level. It's just like, how is that even wood? Like Larry Barth, he's probably the best carver there is. It's like he did a pair of seagulls, and it's like you're like waiting for them to move, like move. um, but it's wood. It's crazy. Like, and I hope to someday, be on that world class table. And so I guess I'll just go through some of my tools now. So I guess next slide, please. There we go. All right. So that is a Fordham. It's like a big motor and it has a flexible shaft that goes, it's hanging from my ceiling in the shop. It almost reaches to the floor. And at the end of that flexible shaft is a handle, and that's what holds the bit. I think there are other brands, but I think most carvers use the Fordham. Mine is the TX version. But next slide, please. It's got a pedal. There we go. So I can adjust the speed with my foot, and then you can see next to my foot that's the handle. So I can right now it's got a sander on it, but it can hold lots of big bits. That's what I use to really, really take away a lot of wood. So like when I was carving this harpy eagle, like like got in there and it carved, and I mean it's taken away a lot of wood at a time. I think the next slide, please. It should there we go. Yeah, so that big red bit, you don't want to get your finger in front of that because that's gonna that's gonna take away a lot of wood, or maybe even your fingers. So and then that little tool that right there, the little wrench. Um, so if I want to change the bit, I put the pin, a little black pin through the handle that stops it from accidentally spinning. Obviously the motor's not on, but the thing might spin a little bit. So I put the pin through the handle and then turn the wrench, and that loosens the collet so I can pull the bit out. So let's say I want a cushion sander. A cushion sander is gonna like sand everything down, and it's got rubber inside so that it can softly move around the shape of the bird. and just it's not going to take away too much wood, but it's going to give that nice soft feel. I use Tupelo mostly to carve. I think most carvers do that. Basswood is another wood that I know carvers use, but Tupelo is really light. Even a big piece, it's easy to carry. Um, and it's almost got no grain, so it's really easy to carve. It
Well,
holds the
hold on. I'm going to interrupt you for just a second.
yeah,
Are people able to see both Jack um, and the slides of the images?
Yes. Or one image. We see the your slideshow, and then we see Jack.
Okay. Some people um, I'm seeing in the chat that some people are not being able to do that. It might be that the view, yeah, try the speaker view if you have different views, and we'll see if that kind of gets you where you want to be. Um, so I've got some thumbs up in there. Um, all right, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to
but
make
yeah.
sure that people were able to see what you're doing here. It's
All right, good. So what
I
I
got
was
to get
saying,
me one of these sander things. This
yeah,
looks cool.
um, so yeah, mostly the big bits I use, like the big carbide. So what's in the handle right now? That's a large carbide with an aggressive grit. So it's going to take away a lot of wood at once. That's usually the first bit I use when I first set tool to wood in the very beginning of a carving. That's usually what's going to remove a lot of wood very quickly. And then I slowly move down to maybe a smaller carbide and eventually sanding. And then I use a finer tool to cut in feathers. So next slide, please. Yeah, so that's another look at the size of the carbide I use.
And you still have all your fingers.
Yeah, yeah. Thankfully, yes. The metal piece that's going down from the red there, that's the shank. So that's 1/4 inch diameter. That's what most of the tools for the Fordham I use, although you can change the collet to hold a smaller bit. But the 1/4 inch shank is usually what I use. That's the size for the sander and the carbide and most of the other tools for the Fordham. Next slide, please. That's the cushion sander. So it's a little bit longer than all the others. It's like a cylinder, and it's like a rubber inside. So you slide the sandpaper over the rubber every time you want to change the grit or if it's starting to get worn down. But the rubber really helps it move if you've already created like tracks in the bird. It won't mess all those up. It'll kind of like flow over but it'll still get it a good smooth sanding. That's another thing with the Tupelo. It becomes very smooth. So before you start texturing, you want it to be very smooth. With that cushion sander or with the smaller tool I use to create the feathers. I also have a small cone sander for that to get in tighter places. Next slide, please. Yeah, protection with your eyes and from your mouth is very good. Well, dust. You make a lot of dust when you do this type of carving. So I usually wear that mask when I'm sanding and especially when I'm doing that big carbide work. The glasses, those are a must as well because you don't want to get anything in your eye. You've only got two. Next slide, please. And so that is the next tool after I'm done with the Fordham. That's a lot of people use the brand Ram. Mine is a Guessween or Jesween. I don't really know how to say the brand name, but it's a nice tool. It hasn't really acted up for me yet, but that so you can see like the Fordham, it's a lot more flexible. It's like a cord and it connects to the handle piece. And I usually hold it like a pen, and then I'll have my pinky finger somehow make contact with the carving while I'm holding the bit, well, the handle of the tool. Because if you can make contact with your hand, somehow touch that piece of wood, it'll give you a lot more stability and make it a lot more precise, and it won't shake or anything as you're carving. And then you can see if there's a dial on the tool so I can adjust the speed. So if you're using a cone sander, you're going to want it at you don't want it at a high speed at all. You don't, because that'll like bust up the sander pretty quickly. And it won't make your sanding job as smooth. So, but if I'm using like a diamond bit, or a ruby bit, I'll turn it up all the way. Next slide, please. Yes, that's another look at, that's kind of how I hold the tool, and then I'll put my pinky finger, like I said, on the wood. Looks like that's one of the flame ruby bits in there right now. So that's like one of the I use like two. I use like a fat one that's in right now, and then a finer one, and that's really all I need to carve in all the feathers. Smooth them over. If I want like an undercut, I'll use that feather. Not that feather, that bit. And that's probably like one of my most essential tools, that bit right there that I use for carving. Next slide, please. So that also is with the smaller, that'll go in the smaller tool, not the forward. And the other one that was sitting on the table, that's a stone. So that will put in a lot of texture, which makes it look like feathers. If you see on this bird here, these feathers in the front here, the texture on them, that was done with the stone. So the stone, you'll like put it in, and I usually turn that up full speed. And then you'll go boot, doot, doot, and you got, I mean, it takes practice, but you can get the lines right next to each other and they look just like feathers. So like on the chest of a bird, that'll be really good because it'll make it a lot softer than a wood burner. Like on this chickadee, it's kind of hard to see with the paint, but that's also what I used. Next slide, please. So those four are probably the most essential bits for the smaller tool that I use. The one all the way to the left is the stone I just talked about. The next one over is a ball. That's what I use to carve out the eye holes, because the eyes are made out of glass. So before you insert them, you have to make a hole for the eye. So that's the perfect tool to make the eye hole. And also rounding out, kind of like smoothing and putting in some grooves around the eye. That's also a nice tool for that. The next one over, the last two are flame ruby bits. Those are like probably the most essential for carving. Those are all, that's what's going to carve in all those little feathers. So like all these around here, all these on top, that's what shaped up the inside of the mouth. That's what carved the tongue. That, I mean, probably like 50% of that bird is carved with those two bits. So those are really essential as well. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, here is where I keep all my bits. You can see the big carbines, the yellow one, and the reds, and then the cushion sander there. It's a nice little tool there. It like spins, so I can spin it to get whatever bit I need. That came with the purchase when I bought the Fordham. It's a nice little spinner there. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so now once the bird has been all the feathers have been cut in, all the splits have been put in, which if you look, yeah, I think you can see here. The splits are the little splits in the feathers. So there's one there, one right there, there. All those little splits, once those have been put in as well, and all the feathers are cut in, it's been sanded, so now it's ready for texture. So next, that wood burner is what's going to do the job. That's going to put in the shaft of the feather. So I'll go down on one side, down on the other, and put the burner at an angle so that the shaft almost is lifted up from the feather, so it looks like a real shaft of a feather. And that's also what's going to burn in the barbs. So
yeah, you're having to sort of think like I imagine like if I were doing this with a pencil, I would just draw that shaft in. But here you're to get that, you want that shaft to be sticking up. So
exactly.
then you're carving around that shaft. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's
yeah, so
really cool.
Once I carve in the shaft, well, once I burn in the shaft, there's no more carving to do. So now, I usually do all the shafts on the bird, and then I can go in and start doing the barbs. So if it's a big bird, it's going to take a while because you have to do, I mean, you got the whole bird, and you're going to burn in each and every little barb on every single feather on that entire bird. So, I mean, but it's a lot of fun though. So like, I'll just be like sitting at my desk or in the shop, just burning away. Yeah, next slide, please. So that's what the burner will do. That was just on a little extra piece of wood, but that's what it's going to look like essentially on the carved in feather on a bird. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so once all the feathers have been burned in, everything's done, the eye holes are in, everything's done, everything's ready. I spray the bird with a clear sealer. It's usually like gloss or semi. It doesn't really matter if it's glossy or not. But now the bird is sealed. it's ready to be painted. But before I start painting, you need to gesso the bird. Oh wait, no. Yeah. So you put the eyes in before the gesso. Sorry. So that's a two-part epoxy clay. So I take a little glob from the white container and a little glob from the black, and I dip it in water, however much I need for like the harpy eagle, and it was a lot of putty because it's big eye hole. So I dipped it in water. You mix it, and fold it, and until because like the white one is a lighter color and the black one is like a yellowish, and you get it until it's an even gray. Um, and once it's all nice and pliable, then you'll fill the eye hole and insert the eye, and then just kind of smooth it over, and you'll take your brush and like put it around the eye to kind of give it an eyelid, like a little ring around the eye. If you look at the harpy, you can sort of see it around there, but that's not actually wood. That's the epoxy clay, and that'll get as hard as rock, so that your eye is not going to fall out once you put that around it. Next slide, please. And then once the eyes are in, you want to make sure it's nice and tacked up and hard. And then you put that's gesso. So once you put the gesso on, it'll make all the other colors on top of it pop because it's got a white base. So before this harpy eagle was all the colors it was all white, painted with the gesso. It's also like a primer, so it'll like prime the wood and get it ready for painting. But you do not want to touch the eyes with the gesso, because if the gesso dries on top of your eye, it's never gonna come out. You wouldn't even like if you had to scratch it off, it would scratch your eye, and that would be a problem. So you got to be careful that you don't touch the eye when you're putting the gesso on.
I hope you haven't learned that from experience. I can
Yeah,
imagine.
I was actually told that by my teacher, so I haven't done that yet. Hopefully, I won't ever do it. Next slide, please. So that's the brush I use to put on the gesso. So I mean, you're not really trying to make it look good or anything. You just want it all covered in an even white. So that's a nice big brush to kind of brush over, just make sure all the cracks are filled. Any deep texturing, just get it, make sure it's all white, and then it's ready for the rest of the paint. Next slide. So that is an airbrush. That is an essential part of painting a bird. I mean, I know some carvers don't use it, but I do. I like it. So you have to thin the paint down, because if you try to put I use acrylic paints, by the way. If you try to put the acrylic paint in the little cup of that thing, it's too thick. It's going to get clogged up, and no paint's going to come out. So you have to thin it down with water, and I put it in a little like plastic cup that I can throw away afterwards. And then once I get the water mixed in with the paint, I'll pour it into that cup, and it's ready to spray. So you can see I did some airbrush work on the dark areas here. You can see airbrush
that little soft fade there is beautiful.
It gives a soft look. And then I don't need.
Quick question for you on that. How do you prevent that from getting on the eyes?
You don't. It just goes now. Like, you don't want the gesso to go on the eyes, but acrylic paint is fine. So if I'm like airbrushing, which I did around the eye of this, I just airbrushed, and then at the very end, the eyes will look weird. They're like painted over, but you can take the edge of a knife and scrape it off, or I actually use my fingernail, and then touch it up with a paintbrush so there's no extra paint left on there. But yeah, so it's fine if the acrylic paint gets on the eye. That happens probably every time I paint a bird, but you definitely don't want the gesso on there.
Got it.
Next slide, please. So that's the little air compressor that the airbrush is hooked up to. So I click that on, it'll make a woo, and then it's up to pressure. So then it's ready. The airbrush is ready to use. Next slide, please. Those are the little cups I use. So I'll take one of those every time I need to mix up a new color for the airbrush. I'll put however much paint I need, put a little water in there, mix it up. You don't want you want to make sure it's all mixed up evenly, because then while you're spraying, you'll get a spritz of water, and that's always annoying because it splatters and spreads over the bird. You're like, no. You got to make sure that acrylic paint is mixed up evenly with the water. Next slide. And these are the paints I use. Joe Sanja, acrylic artist paints. They're really nice. I love them. That's what my teacher uses too. I think that's what most carvers use. It's by the brand Chroma, I believe. They're really nice paints. They're really smooth. they're nice and flat. They mix well, they go well with the airbrush. Um, and it's a nice acrylic paint that I love. Next slide. And then, so that's like the final step. Once the bird is all painted, everything's done. The eyes have been, the paint around the eyes has been scratched off. The eyes are nice and clean. That is a, what is it? Yeah, it's a gloss that will go on the beak. So that will give the beak a bit of a sheen like that. And then there's gloss on the beak. And then I use a, what is it? Not satin, but I put it on the quills as well. So if you look, you wouldn't, I don't think you'd be able to see in the camera, but each quill has a little bit of that on it. So it's got a little bit of the sheen that a real quill has. So that's like the very last step, and then the carving's done.
So the individual shafts of the feathers
Mhm.
have their own little hint of gloss on them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ah, that's commitment. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Next slide, please. And then that's the brand of brush I like. I think it's Princeton Velvet Touch, long round, and then that's if you go to the next slide, that's like a liner that I use. So that's like a detail brush. You can use that around the eye if you look. Right here, I used a little bit of white to put those flicks, the bristles by the beak. That was used with that brush. I'll the what are they called? The splits. The splits, I'll use that brush for the splits. If the shaft is a different color than the feather, I'll also use that brush. So I use that brush for a lot of things. But I also use other brushes, like wider ones, to put wash. Actually, this bird had like a really super diluted wash of brown that gave it a nice bit of depth. That was towards the end, but the entire bird, but it was super thin down because you don't want it to be too brown. So it had tons of water and just a nice wash of brown that gave it a nice depth. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so now the process. So before I even start carving, I get all my reference together. So this was for the two songbirds for the commission. So you can see I use Seeing Birds and Bird Pixel a lot. Those are really nice sites. I've also been exploring the Macaulay Library of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Amazing site. It's got millions of pictures of birds. I really like that site, especially for painting. I can get every angle of the bird. There's so many pictures of every single bird that like I can just like hit cardinal. Let's say I'm painting a cardinal and I get every single angle. Especially for color, it's really good. I love that. I think I use Seeing Birds the most for this. So I start sketching it. I'll erase if I need to, get it just how I want. And sometimes, usually I draw it too big. So I'll put it in the printer and size it down until I like how big it is, especially for the humming. I've done a few hummingbirds and I always sketch it too big. So I'll use the printer to size it down to a size I like, make sure it's correct with the size of the actual bird. And then next slide, please. But yeah, so I think a good base in just like getting in, just understanding the anatomy. And I mean, I love to watch birds. I like to draw birds, paint birds. I think that's a really good base to when you start carving. Then, because then you have a feel of the anatomy of a bird. So these are a few of my paintings I did recently. That's a white-throated sparrow. Next slide.
Maybe even before we go on to this one here, this drawing here shows me that already that your brain is really wrapping around these birds. The angles that you can see, the wingtip on the far side, it's the length and location of that shows your three-dimensional thinking. The body is tilted slightly away from us. The head is then rotated slightly back towards us. There's all sorts of examples of three-dimensional thinking here, and this is what you can move towards if you start kind of thinking of birds as three-dimensional shapes. This little sketch here shows it all. The way that this isn't a flat bird. This has form, it has structure that functionally works as that bird could rotate in space. So, yeah.
That's another hummingbird I did. Also, I feel like all the classes I've taken from you have really built a really good foundation to when I started carving. Um, I think that base of just having sketched birds a lot, I felt almost like pretty prepared, especially when I first started carving. I could almost like it's just have really good to have a foundation of sketching, watching birds, reading about birds, studying their anatomy. That definitely really helps,
Yeah.
especially when you're carving. This is Costa's hummingbird I did. Next slide.
Nice job hitting those lights around the eye there.
Yeah.
And also, um, some mad points for getting the darks in that gorget.
Yeah, I feel like if you want to make that gorget stand out, you have to put a lot of black. Now, like sometimes they'll be at an angle where it's no black and it's just like shining brilliance of
Yeah.
iridescence, but those blacks really make the purples pop. American Goldfinch I did a few days ago. I've been really liking the style of like using a pen to outline. I feel like it gives it a crisp look.
Mhm.
Has some colored pencils in there as well. Next slide. It's funny. I did two finches on the same page, a goldfinch and a house finch. Um, well, again, watercolor. I usually paint with watercolor, whereas when I paint a bird, a carved bird, I use acrylics. So I like playing around with those two mediums. Next slide. Hermit warbler did a little while ago. Also like the not giving as much definition on the branches there, and that really like was pulled the attention and almost put the branches in the background. Whereas if I had outlined all of them with a pen, um, yeah. Next slide. Um, Prairie falcon. I didn't even paint the whole thing. I just wanted to focus on the head. Um,
Mm, mm, yeah. And just how that the far side of the head sort of wraps around the end of the bill there, that little ridge above the eye. Again, this is 3D thinking.
Next slide, please. Yeah. So now back to this slide. So now I've got my two birds sketched out. I'll usually cut them out so that I can trace onto the wood, as you'll see next slide. Um, so now they're on the wood, on the edge of a block of Tupelo, just so I can save as much wood as I can.
Hmm.
And I did not cut them out, but they're cut out on a bandsaw. And then they're just cutouts that are ready to carve. Usually, especially for like big birds like the harpy and another bird I'll talk about later. You also want to draw a top view to also cut on the bandsaw the top view. That just takes away a lot of unnecessary wood, um, so that you won't have to go in and take all that out with the carbide. So next slide, please. So now the first marks have been set down. I mean, like just kind of pulling that head in, making it to its normal size. I think I put some definition around the wing, just like these first initial cuts, putting in like the major marks of a bird. Next slide. That's another angle of the head. You can see just like it doesn't even look pretty yet. Like it's just like almost that head is pinched in a little bit. I hit that in, kind of rounded the chest around a little bit. Next slide.
And you're keeping track of that center line.
Yeah, that's a big part of it as well. Keeping that center line so you can see like, oh, I'm too far to the left. I better pull that over a little bit. That was something my teacher also said, like always want to have that center line redrawn, redrawn, redrawn.
Yeah.
So you can always have that in so you can make sure your symmetry is correct.
And that's so true also with our sketches, keeping that center line on the head, that center line on the chest. Really, really important. Nice.
Another look. So this bird had its wings drooped below the tail. So I kind of like pulled it down to pull those wings down. The tail feathers actually go up, my teacher said, farther than you think. So you can see them flowing into the back, and then the feathers on the back flow over those coverts, flow on top of the wing, and the tails just kind of disappear, the tail feathers. Um, and you can see like the head has been just shaped in a little bit. Next slide. You can see like those undertail coverts have just been pulled in a little bit. The chest rounded over all the way down there. Next slide. And this is a look at the warbler. So before those were the sparrow I did. Same thing with the warbler. The head has been carved in a little bit under the wings. Chest is just starting to be rounded out. Those first initial cuts. Next slide. Another look at the warbler. You can see like around the head, it's been cut in so that the head isn't like as wide as the body. Under the wing. Next slide. Another look at the sparrow again. You can see those undertail coverts coming in. And my teacher also said you want to get the top of the bird done. So like, especially like the tail coverts, you want to get that top looking nice, and then you go in and do the bottom. Because if you like and get the bottom right, then you've got none left for the top. So and that's usually what you're going to see the top if you're looking at the carving. So have the chest rounded out there. Next slide. Another look at the top, so you can see like with the warbler. Yeah, that is the warbler. His wings were just level with the tail, so I didn't have to pull it down as much, but you can still see that tail defined with the wings, a little bit of rounding on the wings as well, and the head cut in. Next slide.
There's that all important center line there.
Yeah.
So keeping that reference. Nice. This is cool.
And then that's just like you can see the size, the carbide, and then the two birds there. Next slide. And then this is a little bit farther on. So now the beak has got a little bit more definition. You can see some of those tracks coming in on the chest there. You can see like the eyes, like that groove coming in on the eyes. That's been cut in. Next slide. Again, some of the feather groups getting cut in on the warbler. A little bit more definition on the beak there. And it's coming along. Next slide. And that's both of them, a good top view. You can see some of those feather groups cut in on the warbler.
Yeah, look at that, all those feather groups on the wing there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Again, center line is still there. All right, you can see, yeah, I think that was the same step. So just another angle of the beak. Some of those tracks underneath the wing, feather groups on top of the wing. Next slide. All right, so now the sparrow's a little bit farther along. Now it's kind of caught up to where the warbler was. So you can see the feather groups cut in there. Those cheeks you can see have been cut in. The cape has been cut in. So now I'm all done with the Fordham. Now I'm just using the ram tool. This is with those diamond bits I talked about earlier. This is what's cutting all those in, rounding it over, softening it. You don't want it to be too hard, especially when you're cutting in feathers. That kind of rounds it out, evens them out, keeps the track smooth. Next slide. Same thing. Now the eye holes have been put in. So you want to be careful that they're not, like if you look on top view of the bird, you don't want the eyes to be like, meh. You don't want it to be like that. So like I'll usually like find the placement, like, all right, it's this far back from the beak, looking at pictures. All right, this is where the eye hole is going to be. And then I'll carve in the eye hole. And then I'll take the pencil and go over the bird's head and be like, all right, now that's where the eye is going to be on the other side. So it's even with the eye on this side that I already carved.
Yeah, those sort of kind of getting those things to have parallel place in our sketch is also so important.
So especially in competition, if like the judges are going to see if those eyes are a little bit offline. So you want those nice and even.
Yeah.
Another top view of the warbler, that's right. So now I've kind of softened over those feather groups. I didn't want them too hard. The cheeks have been cut in, cape, kind of same as the sparrow now. Looks like I should have put in my center line there. Next slide. And now a little bit more detail has been put into the sparrow, so you can see the line, the separation of the two mandibles has been put in. You can see that the eye hole. You can see some of the grooves around the eye. Some of the lines coming down, like the cheek, the outline of the cheek. You can see that coming down from the beak. From the beak there, you can see. I think I might have been at that point I put in the hole for the nostril. maybe not. I don't know. I don't know. Next slide. Another side view of that.
That
Same,
that eye hole placement must just be so unforgiving.
yeah.
It's scary to kind of get to the point where you're going to drop that eye in.
Hmm. And especially like once it's all sealed and everything, it really brings the bird to life when you put those eyes in, because it's like it almost it still seems like a carving when the eyes aren't in, but then you put those eyes in and it just comes to life. It's kind of like when you're doing a painting, and you put the little bit of highlight on the eye, it just brings it to
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, yeah.
Next slide. So now once all the carving's done, all the texturing, if I'm doing feathers and texturing, all the texturing's done. All right, I'm done. I'm ready to
Wow.
spray. So that's the spray that I use. Spray the birds, get an even coat. You don't want to get the spray bottle too close because that'll make it drip and then it'll look weird. So I like keep it like not like that far away. I'm spraying it, turning it, and then I let it dry. My teacher said if you smell it and you can't really smell the fumes, then it's all ready to paint. Ready for those eyes to go in. Next slide. All right, here we go. So that was, yeah, so that was the end of the Sparrow and Warbler. Now I'm gonna go through some slides of the process for carving this big guy right here. Um, I carved him for the World Championship this year. I started him in September and I finished around April, but I did take a break because my brother had soccer, but it took the good part of like however many months that is. So next slide. All right, I've got my so at this point I've sketched out my design, traced it on the wood, cut it out, and now I'm putting those initial cuts on there. So it's crazy to like look at the before and after. That's like only the first marks have been put in. So like it's about like yeah. So before and after.
And so on this one, have you also used that bandsaw to cut the top view as well as the side view?
Yes, because that would be a lot of wood to take away. So you could just take the bandsaw and like just kind of like chop those areas off because that's gonna save you a lot of work and time of just grinding away. So like you can see like the angle, those two pieces were chopped off. But I don't think any was done on the back because I wanted to leave room for those feathers that are kind of flaring out there. Now they were
Yeah.
inserts, so like that one, and that one were separate pieces of wood that were inserted like
Yeah.
that.
But the rest of those you carved as flaring
Yes.
out on their own.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Next slide. All right, so that's a little bit farther on. So
Wow.
now I'm basically all done with the Fordham. All those big feather groups have been carved in. It's been sanded, and you'll notice there's a knot. We didn't even know about. I didn't even know about that when it was cut out, but it happened that there was a knot there, and it was super hard. I couldn't even put my bit into it. It would just like burn up my bit. So we actually had to go back and knock it out with the carbide, and I had to fill it with auto body, let it harden, and carve it into feathers. But I mean, you would never notice. Like you look, like some of
Wow.
these feathers right here, they aren't wood. It's the auto body. But you'd never know. Yeah. So now I'm, carving, put those some detail on the beak. The eye hole's been carved in, and I noticed the harpy eagle had very forward facing eyes, as really any raptor would, but especially it was crazy how forward their eyes were,
Mm.
like it's looking right at you.
It's the last thing the monkey sees.
Yeah. Next slide. Another view of just kind of putting in those tracks because you want to put in the tracks before you put in the feathers, because if you carve in the feathers and then you go to put in the track, it destroys all your feather work that you just did. So putting in tracks like on the back of the bird, on the top of the bird, those tracks that come in off the beak, flowing down the bird's body. Especially if you're doing a full size bird, like on the chest, there's some deep, nice pockets and stuff that I put in before all the feathers go in. Next slide. So
Oh.
now is another look. A little bit farther on, I'm starting to carve in feathers. You can see the tongue. I just put it in there for the picture. It's not actually in yet. So the tongue was a separate little block of wood that I shaped into the tongue and eventually glued into the bird. And yeah, so the tongue and the 6 insert feathers were separate pieces. Everything else was from that solid block. You can see
Bird
I've
tongues are so weird. If those kind of like backward spikes, they just got
yeah.
they're funky.
hmm Um, little more detail around the eye, some more feathers cut in. Next slide. Another look at it there. Just starting to cut in all those feathers. And I don't think the splits have been cut in yet. Just starting to put in the feathers and smooth them over and sand them. Next slide. Another look at it there. You can see some of those feathers on the back been carved in. Just
Just this
working
thing
my
emerging from this chunk of wood.
yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It's coming along and it's surprisingly light. Like even the large bird I'm working on now, it's really light, which also helps, especially if you're doing a bird in flight. You need all the lightness you can get. And even with Tupelo, carvers will literally chop the bird's body in half, hollow it out with like a ball carbide, just hollow it until it's super light, and then they glue it back together. You never know because those pros are good at like smoothing over the putty, and it looks like there was no seam at all. But now it's really light, so you can put it, even if it's just a wingtip touching the base and that bird's in flight, you want it as light as you can get it. Next slide. Another look at the top there, all those feathers on the top been carved in.
Yeah. With so much of the drawing that I do, there's certain feathers that you need to know where they are. Here you
mhm.
cannot hide from any feather. You need to figure out how that one is overlapping that one. This is this is just it is demanding of your sense of anatomy. It's
Yes, and
really cool.
yeah, I feel like you helped me with that, and my carving teacher as well, like how these feathers flow in groups, how they like spread off, and the tracks, how the feathers like connect to the tracks, because you can't just be drawing on feathers. It works. It like goes with those tracks. It like you got to know how to do that. Next slide. All right, so now you can see that that big knot has been knocked out. The auto body was put in, sanded down the auto body, and turned it into feathers. So now you can see the feathers in the auto body now. The feathers have been sanded, so it's nice and smooth. That beak has been sanded again. Just sand, 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 so it's nice and smooth. Because when you're painting, if you're painting a surface that hasn't really been sanded, it's not going to look as good. It might be fuzzy. It's going to be harder to put detail in because it's a little bit bumpy. So you want that surface nice and smooth and soft, so it's good when you paint. So now you can see I'm putting in those shafts there. I'll usually go in and put all the shafts before I start putting the barbs. And although I don't, you would not want to put your wood burner on that auto body because it would really make some fumes. So I use the stone with a mask on to carve the texture into that. Next slide. And there's some of the insert feathers. So it's almost like 2 feathers in one. I think that actually connects to right here.
Oh yeah.
So
Yep.
that's that feather right there.
Enough.
So I burned in the shaft and the splits. And my teacher was also saying, you don't want to use the stone to carve in the splits that are hanging off an edge. So you can see the splits on the feather, the smaller feather, are done with the diamond. But then the splits on the outside are done with the burner. Because if you try to do that outside bit where there's no wood underneath it, the diamond bit is just going to fall away and you're going to see how thick it is. How thick, like for the judges, they're going to see how thick that wood actually is. So you usually want to use a burner to do those outside overhanging edges. Next slide. All right. Yeah, most of the shafts are now in and it's ready to be started on all those little barbs. It'd be cool to count like somehow like 1, 2, 5,001, 5,002. It'd be funny to get a count of how many barbs were on that. I should do that with the bird I'm carving now. It's actually a really big one. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. I should actually count all the barbs, not be a fun number to have. Um, Next slide. So yeah, now I actually did a different technique that that my teacher suggested. It was because usually like it's you're either gonna burn a feather or you're gonna texture it with the stone. But he actually suggested to give a softer look for this harpy eagle, I would do the outside of all the feathers with the stone, but then finish up the inside with the burner. So I actually had to do the bird twice essentially. I had to go all over each feather with the stone and then come in and burn the rest. So but it turned out pretty well. So next slide. So yeah, now you can see like it only looks like the inside of the feathers have been burned because I did the outside with the stone. You can see I used the wood burner to do that bristly area around the eye and the beak.
Yeah.
And I just used the stone for the area below the beak. I just wanted to give that a softer look. All those little feathers around the beak, on the head. So it looks like that bird is almost completely textured. Next slide. Another view of that. The judges were actually saying when I took it to the competition that it's a little too flat on the middle there. And I agreed not after they said it. But they also said like one of the guys was saying all birds, they're really not going to have any flat areas on their body. It's going to be either round or concave. But he also said that all the feathers on the outside that are flaring out did a good job to hide that. So next time, if I do another harpy eagle, I'll probably want to round that out a little bit more and maybe even add some insert feathers on the middle there. That was one of their critiques. Next slide. Just another view of.
Wow. That's so cool to see.
Next slide.
Nope, sorry.
I actually unfortunately, I didn't get that many pictures of the painting process. So the next slide is when it's all done, but I'll give a few angles of that. So yeah, the next slide, the eyes have been inserted, everything's painted up and ready for the competition. It was pretty hard detailing with the ruby bit, the inside of that mouth, especially the upper, like the top side of the inside of the mouth. I had to like turn it, get my tool in there and not mess anything else up. I've also read that some carvers, I guess for this piece, they'll with a small jeweler's saw, they'll cut off either the bottom or the top of the beak. So like for this bird, you would cut off the top of the beak so that you can get in there and carve all of that, and maybe even down the throat, and then they'll attach it back on. I didn't do that for this piece, but it was an interesting technique that I read.
Well, that would be scary.
Yeah.
Doing this work and they're like, I'm gonna get out a saw and cut off your beak now, right?
Yeah.
But just those little bristles are in front of the eye, and that the little eyelids around that eye. Just each little part is attention and love and focus. The whole thing just comes together beautifully.
Yeah. So I think next slide should be another angle of that. Yep, there's a view of the back you can see. So like I started with the airbrush, but then I went in with a like a regular normal brush to kind of clean up. Because if you just do an airbrush, it'll look like you used an airbrush, and everybody will know you used an airbrush. So like if you can, you use the airbrush, but then come back and sharpen it up with a regular brush, and it'll look really nice.
Yeah, sometimes when the signature of the tool is too much in your face, I'll see that sometimes people do a sky with sort of wet and wet technique with watercolor, and it doesn't look so much like a sky, but it looks like wet and wet technique with watercolor.
Yeah.
And it makes cool patterns, but it's just sort of too much the tool and not the phenomenon. That's beautiful.
Next slide. Yeah. So that was a hummingbird I did. So that's what a gessoed bird looks like. It's all white, it's primed. And ready for painting, that was a white-necked Jacobin hummingbird I did. I this was one I didn't do at class. I did this all at home. And I learned a lot when I carved it. I think I made it a little too big, but especially the head, I think was too big compared with the rest of the body. I think the tail was a little bit too short. So now I've got all that experience. So next time I carve a hummingbird, I'll make it even better. Um, Next slide should show another view. Yep, so that's all finished. I just did like a simple branch on a walnut pedestal.
Hmm.
It was fun doing the iridescence on the back there. I think the next slide should show that. Oh, no, that's another view of that. That's like the front. Um,
Oh,
there
there
we
you
go.
go.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with the back there, that iridescence and the texturing, the tail as well. That was fun blending. So I used some green and blues to blend, but then I also took some iridescent paint, which it's almost clear, but it has a shimmer of the color. So
Yep.
you'll want to put down the color that you want, like the blue and then the green, and then you add the blue iridescence and the green iridescence, and then it looks like a iridescent hummingbird.
That's cool. Yeah, we can't
Mhm.
really get away with that with the iridescent paint on our pictures. Anytime you scan something with iridescent paint on it, you kind of lose all that iridescence and it
Yeah.
just starts to clunk. So we have
Hmm.
to suggest that. But here you can actually let the natural light play around with the iridescence in the paint. That's fun.
Exactly.
That's
That's
fun.
odd. And that's a woodpecker I did. I think that was after, because the first ward championship I did, I entered an Anna's hummingbird um in the youth category. Um um it was funny. I was the only one in my division. Of course, there were people in the so I was the only one in the 12 to 15 division. Of
Oh,
course, there was somebody in the division above me and more people below me, but I didn't have any competition.
mm.
So, I mean, it was still a lot of fun. I got to get a lot of inspiration. And then the next year, I entered the Harpy in the youth division again. Of course, there's nobody in my division
Ah,
again. So next year, I think I'm ready. I'm going to enter an intermediate.
that's great.
That's a woodpecker I did, I think, after the hummingbird. Um, Next slide.
Yeah, as you're talking about the proportions, say on the hummingbird, it's so easy to do that also with our drawings. That whatever
Hmm.
part we're really interested in, like you've got a cool head, and then we make it too big. But we don't really, for some reason, we never really see that until the project's all done. And then we kind of go like,
Hmm.
oh,
Yeah, like I didn't even really realize that the bill was crooked until I held it up in the mirror. And I think that's a really good way to get another view of your carving. And I was like, huh, that is crooked. And I feel like, especially when I'm painting, um, it's really good to put it in the mirror to give, it almost gives you another view. You can almost see it
hmm
at two different
hmm
angles. You can see through your eyes and then through the mirror. And that really helps when you're painting and carving. So this is a picture of a hummingbird I've just started. So I'm tackling this pretty complex
Whoa. I,
pretty complex position.
you're not shying away from difficult subjects here.
Yeah, so it's a wine-throated hummingbird. It's got its tail fanned out and it's got its wings up behind it, and then the gorget flared out. So if you
Ah!
go to the next slide, um, is the bird roughed out?
Oh,
Just those first marks, you can see where I'm going with it. Just
I
started
see.
to round
You're
it
going from
out.
a reference photo that is from one angle, and now your brain has to figure out all the stuff that is out of that camera view.
Yeah, and luckily, I was looking around on the Macaulay Library and I was able to get almost exactly that same position in two other angles. So that really helped. I was able to get an
Wow.
angle of the back in that same position and another angle in the same position. So that I think really helped as I was carving it.
Yeah.
And next slide, I think that should be another view. Yep. So there's those
Mm.
wings popping up um, as I block it out. We'll rough it out, I guess. And I left the tail nice and thick so that I can kind of bring it down to the level I want. So I think it's a little too close to the wings. So I might bring it down on the top a lot and not really touch it on the bottom so that I can take the level down so it's kind of to what it is in the picture. You
Yeah.
can see I've got some pencil marks sketched
Yep.
out to where I'm going to take the wood away next.
So you're carving, then redrawing, and then carving and redrawing it. And oh,
Mhm.
that's really neat. That's really fun.
Yeah, that's another angle. can see that side there. I'm going to take away, it's a little too fat on the sides there. So I'm going to carve some of that down, kind of flatten out the wings to what I want it to be. Some of the top there around the face. Hopefully it turns out well. Next slide. All right, here we go. So this is what I'm carving right now, life-size carving in progress for the World Championship 2025. So this is what I'll be entering in intermediate. It's a life-size carving of the Harris's Hawk. It's about yay big. And then so you get next slide should
And
be,
how many barbs you think that's going to be
I don't
on?
even want to think about that yet. So that's essentially what I'm going for. So it's just I really like that position. It's just landed. It's got its head down. It's bringing its wings in. I didn't really want to commit to a full wing spread, so it's about like it's bringing its wings in but not fully in. And I like that claw over the top branch. So that's what I'm going for as well. So I started that late August, and so next slide should be a picture of the cutout. Yep. So that gives you a sense of how big it is. So that's I haven't done any carving to it yet. It's just the cutout with the side view and the top view cut out on the bandsaw. And now I'm ready to start carving. So next slide should show, yep. So first marks being put down. You can see I've got the mask and the glasses on. You can see my hair is getting covered in dust. That thing kicks up a lot of dust. It's good to have good dust collection. In my shop, I've got like a fan with a filter so that it pulls all the dust in, and then I can knock it out outside or with a vacuum. Next slide. So that's like after the first class, you can see like I mean the whole process is going to go a little bit slower since it's so big, but you can see like those two big like socks almost that are going to go over its leg. I've just been kind of separated. Some of the sides have been kind of rounded over, just kind of rounding, and just that general shaping has just been begun. Just started. Next slide. Another view of the head, just those initial cuts. So I'm going to have the head turning to the right, kind of how it is in the picture. So it's going to be like off at an angle from the branch with its wings out. Next slide. Another angle of that, so you can see like the
and you got those hawk pants.
exactly,
You see
yeah,
the
those
hawk
are
pants coming in now. This
hawk
is
pants
fun.
to be carved in. At this point, I think I thought of this. I've been keeping track of how long it's taken me. So far, I've got 45 hours on it. I think at this point it was probably around 6 hours and 45 minutes because I actually spent a lot of time sketching it out. So actually, it's right here. Hold on.
This is amazing to see this process.
This is the sketchbook I used to sketch out the pattern.
Are some of the sketches in it?
I think so. So this was my initial sketch, but there were some proportions that were off. I think the head was a little too big. The tail was a little bit too short, but this was my first sketch. I think the other one is somewhere else, but that's what so I kind of refined it a little bit. And then I cut it out and then also drew the wings separate because the two wings, as you can see on the bird, obviously they're two separate pieces. They should be showing in a minute, but those are going to be inserted. So it's just the scapulars that are going to be carved in on the bird itself, and then the rest of the wing will be inserted. Next slide. Yep, so those are the wings, just been cut out, and all that I've done to them so far is round them over, and a little bit define the secondaries, but
yeah, I see sort of secondaries, primaries lump.
Next slide.
Oh, this is fun.
That's another angle. So I wanted to leave it super thick on those sides so that it could give a lot of undercutting because the primaries are really, really undercut. So I wanted to leave plenty of room so that I could do that. Next slide.
So it'll be scooped out on the inside.
So it's scooped out on the inside, but then the primaries are separated so that you can almost see through them. So like I wanted all that separation.
Oh,
leave a lot
whoa. This is going to be crazy. And then you also get that camber, so that thicker towards the front, and then you get towards that trailing edge of the wing where it gets all, it gives you that airfoil shape in the wing too.
Hmm. There's me working on it. You can see the primary, secondary difference has been because I needed a nice big step because the secondaries are really going to be undercut as well because they're heavily stacked at an angle like that. So like secondary, 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 secondary.
Yeah.
Because its wings are pulled in so much that they're like flaring up. So I needed to leave a lot of room for that. Um,
So
so
what I'm seeing here also is that you're intentionally challenging yourself. You're intentionally giving yourself a project that will push the edges. You're not staying where it's safe. You're willing to go out on that thin ice and um and and see what happens. This is the best way to grow in any skill. That's really cool.
yeah, because I did the Harp Eagle and I was like, next competition I want to do something big. And I was like, what can I do that's going to be big? And then for my birth, I think it was my 13th birthday, I did like a Falcon experience. And I actually got to hold a Harris's Hawk. So that's kind of what inspired me to do the Harris's Hawk because I had gotten like that experience with the Hawk. Um, and I just thought they were really cool. They're desert birds.
Mm.
They hunt in packs, actually, kind of like wolves of the sky. And I thought it'd be a really cool bird to carve. And then I found that really cool picture, and I've been working on it since late August. So next slide. All right, so now this is pretty big jump in the process. So this is almost up to where I am now. So you can see the eye hole has been cut in.
And you got that
Uh,
supraorbital ridge, like the visor above the eye that gives
mm,
the hawk such a glare.
that mean hawk look.
Yeah. Ah.
So and then you can see I actually got pretty worried. The when the whole thing got cut out on the beak, there were a few checks, like little tiny, tiny, tiny little cracks, little checks that were going over the beak. And my teacher said like when he orders the wood, the ends are chopped off like a corn cob, so that all the checks would be out. But the cutout must have just been on the edge of that, and it must have caught a few of those checks. And as I was carving the tip of the beak flew off, and I was like, no, no, the tip of the beak. But he actually said we might have even done that on purpose because most carvers, when they're carving something that, like especially a hummingbird or like the tip of a hawk beak, that's gonna have that sharp, delicate point, like one little nudge and it's broken. So what I did, what he showed me to do, so now the tip of the beak has been cut off. That also gave us a really good chance to sand underneath the beak there, really close up to the tip without having to worry about the tip. Um, that was a good chance to sand that up and shape it up, without having to worry about hitting the tip of the beak. And then I drilled a tiny little hole into the beak. That was actually kind of scary. And then inserted a little nail, little like finishing nail, and glued it in. Once that's all glued with epoxy, so it's nice and hard, it's not going to come out. Um, there's actually a chemical reaction when you put thinned like watered down super glue on the nail, and then you hold up a little pile, like on a toothpick, not a toothpick, popsicle stick, a little pile of baking soda. The super glue almost sucks the baking soda up and creates this little bit on the end of the beak. It's rock hard. It's not gonna break. It's super hard,
Hmm.
way, way harder than the wood. It's almost like stone. Um, but it will create fumes. So I had to put on like a mask for fumes, and then I can shape it down to how I want the beak to look. And now I know it's not going to break at all. Uh,
Wow. Wow. The material science in this is also really fun.
mhm. I know a lot. I've got a lot of metal work coming, with the feet. Last class, I got one of the pieces of metal for the feet. So that'll be like, I've never made feet before except for the hummingbird, but those were just little pieces of metal. Now I'm actually going to be able to take a big piece of metal and turn it into a hawk foot. I've never
Yeah.
done that before, so that'll be fun to do. A
You
new
know,
aspect.
once you develop those skills, you'll be very talented.
Hmm. Um, I get it. I didn't even get it. Oh, yeah, yeah, okay. That's funny. Um, Next slide. So another look at the front there. Now my beak isn't crooked like the harpy.
Yeah.
So you can see those
Show me
eye
this
holes.
imagery.
Hmm. Next slide. Now you can see it. There's some brightness, but you can see I've started carving in on the chest, those feathers. And looking at some reference pictures, they're very flat. They're not really defined that much. So I wanted to make sure I keep them nice and smooth and flat, not really like steps at all. Just
Yeah.
nice and smooth, just a little hint of definition on each feather because they're very like matted down. Um, so I didn't want to define them too much, but now they're a little bit defined.
Yeah, there's a difference between understanding the structure so that the structure is revealed in what you do versus kind of overworking the structure and showing all the things you know. You have to show a little bit less than you know. And so sometimes we kind of know that there's all this structure in there. And when we put it in, it just kind of kills it. Um, I know that like a lot of my drawings from my first in the first bird book that I was working on, I'm crazy overdoing the definitions between all the different feather groups in the wings. And just because I was so excited to have learned that, and like I'm drawing this wing accurately,
Yeah.
but it still wasn't what I see.
Hmm. You can also see some of those big tracks have been cut into the chest. Um, those are important because they're, I mean, especially on the chest, they're big, nice, rounded over, soft. And you don't want to make, you want to make sure they're not super hard, nice and soft tracks, kind of just moving through the bird. Next slide. Another look at the
Mm.
tail, so you can see those tail feathers have been started to cut in. I might put a little undercutting on the end. But my teacher was saying you don't want to put too much undercutting, especially near the body, because in real life that's really not how it is, unless it's like full spread in flight. But maybe a little bit at the end would make it look realistic. But I'm not going to do too much undercutting on the tail. You can see some of those big, soft, lumpy, soft feathers of the undertail coverts coming in. They're still pretty rough, so I'm gonna soften them up, make them nice and soft, and then
Yeah.
sand them until they look like those undertail coverts. Next slide.
Oh, hold on a second. Oh,
So now you can see
oh, see this part here, this is my favorite part of raptors. I love scapular feathers on raptors. This is cool to see.
so they were actually I was surprised at how big they are. The scapulars are really big, so now I've carved in all the scapulars so they're at a hard angle coming up because the bird's wings are so pinched that they're coming up at an angle, and you can see that big hole. That's where the wings are going to go in. Um, and you can also see a little bit of tracking on the back of the neck there.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
then some feathers going to go in there. So tracking kind of smoothed over. Next slide.
Yeah, and also like we're used if you're we're used to scapulars on songbirds, um, which is just going to be the smallest little kind of hint of a bump, which could totally just blend into the mantle on the back.
Mm-hmm.
But on raptors, it's such a big deal. It's such a major part of the structure of of what you see. So that's fun.
Another look at the top of the head. You can see all those tracks have been put in. My teacher also helped me understand like how those tracks kind of connect and flow in and out of each other. So you can see I've kind of softened them up. Now all the little feathers. I was very surprised on how on such a big bird around the face, those feathers are tiny. Um,
Mm.
and like there's such a big difference between the little feathers by the beak and eye, and then the huge primary feathers So now those little feathers on top of the head are ready to cut in. I think the next slide should. Yep, so those are some of those little feathers starting to get cut in. Those were fun.
And I also like that gape and that big brow ridge.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, so you first kind of you rough it in and then you're going to so then you're smoothing out and so in the um there's this balance then between having the structure be there that you can see and then not overshow um so that it doesn't look like a feather diagram. This is cool. And the
Hmm.
also seeing the shape of that beak now from this angle, it is coming together in such a cool hawk face.
Yeah, you can see like the beak has almost got like a little pinch on the beak, so I kind of carved that in. It's like a concave little area.
Yeah.
It's not just a beak. It's like got like a little bit of concave on there that kind of flows into the
Hmm.
cere. Um,
Yeah, I've never had to, I don't think I've ever really shown that in a drawing. But you have to look at, when you're carving these things, you have to look at every little bit of that. Whether
mm.
it's, sticking out or sticking in. That's beautiful. That is so cool.
Another look at the side, so that's under, so the wing will be almost folding over that, but now I've come in and put all those tracks in where the feathers are going to get put into, and now I've taken the cushion sander and sanded it all so it's nice and soft. You can see that big hawk pant coming down.
Yeah. And so
Next
you're
slide.
going to be doing the legs out of metal?
Yeah, so the legs and feet will be out of metal and putty. um
How how
so
how do you develop skills in metal work? Is that's a whole other skill set.
yeah, that's, I mean, I haven't really even done much of that yet. I That'll be like a new experience carving the, oh, not really carving, but like forging these hawk feet. That'll be fun to do because I've never really done that before. That'll be a fun new thing to do in
Hey
addition to.
folks, you're seeing growth mindset right here, right? Yeah, that and how's Jack facing that? Yeah, that'll be totally new. It's something that I've never done before. That'll be fun to learn, right? Think about how can we lean into these new challenges, these new skills, um, instead of having that be something that shuts us down. Oh, this is fun.
Now here's a look at the wings. So these are the secondaries. They're at a really hard angle coming up because the wings are so pinched. And I've taken like the smaller diamond bit, cut under there to get that nice undercutting. That was fun because you just dig in there and get that. It really looks cool in the shadows and stuff. You can see like how undercut it is, and I'm gonna do the same thing to the primaries. You can see they're kind of defined and ready for that big undercutting. I haven't done that yet though.
Oh.
Now there's a look at the whole wing. Most of the feathers have been carved in. You can see some of those softer ones towards the top still need to be carved in. You can see some of those tracks coming in.
Yep.
Um, Secondaries, the alula, all those feathers are being carved in right now. And then they'll be sanded before they're textured. The next slide should show the underside of the wing. Almost looks like a chicken wing at the top, but you can see those primaries coming in, how they're like.
And I can also see this how it's all scooped out. So you've got
Mhm.
that concavity on that underside of the wing. Oh, Jack, this is dynamite. This is so cool. The underwing primary coverts. Oh, amazing. Amazing.
And then the next slide. Yeah, so that's kind of it all put together. So I didn't want the wings to fall out. I had to be nice and careful, but I put it on the stool. So now you can see those scapulars flowing over. And once it's all ready to be done, I think putty and stuff, you'll never notice the seam between the wings.
Yeah.
and you'll never know that it was three separate pieces. But it was fun to put that all together and see what it looked like. So that's kind of a top view of the bird, and then it eventually will be on the branch. I'm planning to have some cactus and maybe some rocks and grass to go along with the habitat. So, and I've also never really made habitat before too, so it'll be fun to do that cactus. My teacher also suggested toothpicks for the little spines coming out. I'm gonna do you've ever seen they're like flat pancake, they like stack up on each other, these cactus but not it's not like a saguaro cactus, but like they're low on the ground, they're like flat. It
Like
looks
sort of
like
the
little,
beaver tail kind.
yeah, let me draw it real quick. Kind of like,
Mm. Still loving those scapular feathers, those bumps of the scapular feathers. For folks, if you're familiar with red-tailed hawks, whenever you look at a red-tailed hawk from the back, there's this pale V on the back of the red-tailed hawk. Those are these light feathers in the scapulars that give it this scapular V. Um,
it's sort of
so,
like
oh
it's
yeah, yeah,
sort of like
yeah.
that. So I thought that would be really cool because they're kind of like desert birds. It'd be fun to have those growing from the base. In a minute, I'll show what my base looks like, but maybe even have some grasses coming up and maybe a few rocks. It'd be fun to
Wait,
make
you're
like,
not going to carve the grasses.
actually, I think I'm gonna make them out of like long sheets of metal. That'd be really hard to make it out of wood, but I think other I've seen other carvers, they take like a long sheet, like a thin sheet of copper, draw the grass on and cut it out, and then maybe even take like a tool to like press in the like a little ball of metal to press in like the veins and stuff.
Yeah.
And then once it's painted, you'll never even know it's metal. It'll look like a blade of grass. And then I'll probably carve the cactus out of wood with some maybe even toothpicks coming out, and it'll once it's painted, it'll look just like those spines. Next slide. So that's another look
Oh,
at
oh.
the.
And then also think about like the lighting conditions that you're going to
Mhm.
show this in can really just sort of show that texture. This with this glancing light, I'm seeing underneath your secondaries there.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to show that with that lighting. You can see a little bit of undercutting on the tail there, but not too much. I haven't really gone in and done that yet. I still have to go in and do the primaries there. I got to undercut them. That'll be fun to do. And it's coming along. Next slide, I think, should show another angle of that. Here's a look at the face. You can see it's got its head turned to the right a
Yeah,
little bit.
just a slight little that kind of gets it out of sort of being a sort of a cardboard cutout thing.
Mhm.
It just like this piece of wood is just turning into this thing that can fly away. Oh, that's really cool. Mm.
I think the next slide should show another angle of that. Just a little bit different view. You can kind of see under the wing there. See the eye. Um, yeah, it's
That
coming.
wing's amazing. That wing is amazing. I you had me at face and hawk pants, but then the underside of that wing is it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. And will this be up at an angle so that people will be able to get in there and appreciate underneath the wing?
Yeah, it's actually going to turn out to be a really big piece of just the whole like the finished product is going to be really big because like just the base branch is like that big, and then I'll have the hawk on top of that. So it'll be a big piece. I think when it's on the table, people should be able to like look under there and see pretty easily. I haven't really thought how I'm gonna transport that yet in the car down to Ocean City, but um definitely take up a lot of trunk space.
That's right. So,
Next slide.
Angel, you can start working on that project now. All right, let's see here. This is amazing just to see this chunk of wood. Folks, remember what this started as? This was a chunk of wood. This was a chunk of wood, or three chunks of wood. Oh,
Yeah,
no,
so
so here's your base. Yeah.
I actually found it in my own yard. It's a piece of Osage orange, and I really liked how old and gnarled and twisted it was.
Yeah.
So the hawk will be kind of like off to the side, like it'll be at the very end of that branch, but it'll be like it won't be right in line with the branch, like going with that flow. It'll be like set to the right, like the picture. And I've got it temporarily mounted on that piece of plywood, just so that I can like hold the bird up to be like, all right, this is how we're gonna do it. So I don't have
Okay.
to hold the piece every time. But it won't have that plywood at the end. Um,
So does range of Osage orange overlap with range of the Harris hawk?
I have no idea, but because like I'm on the East Coast and we have Osage Orange. I don't know if they're out west. Um, but I think it looked very out westy. I feel like it would
Yeah.
really go with its
Yeah.
habitat.
And who who among us can identify a species of tree by a snag? I know there are some people out there that can. Right?
Hmm.
Oh, that's a beautiful piece of wood. That's a beautiful piece of wood.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I'll put in the chat my email. I do take commissions, so if anybody else, let me put in this.
So yeah, I intentionally asked Jack to leave these unpainted and unfinished because I want people to be kind of focusing on the shapes and not the coloration on them. But I also personally just love seeing the wood in the bird and then seeing the bird in the wood. Um, it is that's that's wonderful. Jack, this process is so interesting. And the kind of questions that it gets you exploring and investigating. This is really, really, really rich. Um, you have thought about aspects and geometries of these birds that I have never considered in my lifetime. And I am I also love the way that you are leaning into a challenge. Like when you didn't have anybody in your division, you're like, ah, no, that's not right. Right? Like give me the next challenge. Now let's do a hawk with the wings kind of out and stacked and dynamic and let's learn metal work, right? Um for everybody watching this um, our brains are capable of doing whatever we challenge them to do. But very often we shy away from the challenge to sort of stick with the familiar because that's where we have competencies and comfort. But if we want to grow, the place for growth is outside of that comfort and making yourself comfortable with that discomfort is one of the best ways you can give your brain permission to grow. Jack, this was incredible. What I'd love to do is to throw the conversation open to anybody who's here with us in our community. If you want to come on and give Jack some feedback, have comments, questions, thoughts, or ideas. Um, if you would like to be part of the conversation, you can use the raise hand function and we'll spot that. And and uh, uh, if you if you don't know where the raised hand function is, you can turn on your camera and wave at us, and we will um, we will we'll see you. Yeah, Leslie's been watching this on her computer and now has to go catch the bus, switching over to her phone. Jack, this was really, really fun. I agree with you about sort of leaning into these challenges. And if anybody would like to kind of join us in conversation, again, please do. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, no pressure. But we'd love to invite you to do that. Yeah. Um, what was it that made you initially kind of turn into this direction? Made you sort of think like there's that one little it was a wood carving kit?
Yeah, yeah. It was just like whittling. Like it was just like it came with some wood and a knife, and I think I actually have the book right here. No, it's downstairs. But it was just like how to make this little like wizard, and I eventually started carving things in the branches. Like every branch in sight would have a little wizard carved into it. Um, but then I started like having questions about like how do you do this and this. And we eventually looked around for classes nearby, and we didn't know that Mr. Jeff did power carving. We thought it was hand carving, and we looked at some of his pictures. We were like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So once I went into his class for the first time and started the chickadee, that's when I started into power carving. And that's how I got into that, and I've been loving the power carving ever since. I
Yeah.
still do a
You
little
now
bit of
have a power carving studio set up in your house.
yes, actually, it's nice that I have like that area down in our shop, where I can kick up big clouds of dust and yeah.
Yeah, and so if we don't kind of give ourselves space to kind of make those messes, we don't make art. Um, if you think of in your own house, if there's a place where you can like if you want to do some painting, if you have to kind of like get all this stuff out of the closet and this stuff is over there, it's a big hassle, and then you have to, get it all back before people come over that evening or whatever it is. We tend not to do that just because all of that hassle creates negative reinforcement between you and doing art. So the more that you can kind of lower the bar to like, I'm going to just go down to the shop right now and
Yeah, my brother just brought in some. These are like one of the first things I carved, this little wizard. So like
oh,
when
I
I
thought
did
you're
that,
saying lizards.
yeah.
You're
So
saying
this little it
wizards.
was
Okay.
a branch. And yeah, he's that was kind of rough, and I actually did stuff into pencils too. This little pencil.
Oh, that's great.
So I started doing this, and then I moved into this stuff.
There's a jump there.
Yeah.
That's neat. That's cool. Oh, Jack, this is brilliant. This is brilliant. And just so let folks know, out of the carvings that Jack has made, I'm going to be doing a series of workshops on, in our sketches, on taking these and we're going to be rotating them and noticing all these different things that change from different angles. So, um, we've got one with the wings up, we've got one with the wings down, right? And the um, one with more of the back posture that is the straight line. So you're seeing kind of straight across there, and one with the head up. So with these two little birds here, we're going to be able um, to model and see a whole bunch of changes in the angles and proportions on these birds. And so these are going to help all of us draw. So Jack, thank you so much for enabling all of those lessons.
Yeah, thank you. I had a lot of fun explaining my process, and can't wait to watch your classes with my carvings.
It'll be great. Um, we're going to be wrapping up in just a moment. I want to send a shout out to Avea the Mad Botanist for helping us with logistics on these classes. And again, Jack, I am honored and delighted to have shared this space and spent this time with you. Um, the way that you approach this, your just sort of the joy, the curiosity, how you lean into challenges, and have you've carved quite a niche for yourself. Uh,
Thank you.
um, dear friends, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that this workshop was inspiring to you, um, and I want to encourage you to um, lean into a challenge. Um, Sometimes we'll say like, "Oh, but that's hard." Yeah, that's a great reason to do it. That's a great reason to do it. Um, and that when we are doing things that challenge us, that is the sweet spot for neuroplasticity, for our brains to, when we're doing things that are challenging, our brains are struggling, and so they start zipping together all sorts of new neural connections. Every time you're doing that and developing these skills, learning new things, you are changing the shape of your brain. We all can do this. You can do it. And this was just really inspiring. Jack Revy, it was a delight to be with you.
Same, yeah, thank you.
Take care, everybody.